Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to another reset 20-minute yoga class. This class is called Hip Hinge. So often in many of our fitness movements, we are hinging at the hips. Think of a squat, a deadlift, anytime you are moving your body closer to the floor. In this action of needing to bend the legs, we're hinging at the hips, moving our leg bones back into those hip sockets. But a lot of times, the way we train in yoga class, we actually learn to stop moving the hips back and instead learn to tip our pelvis and do that swan dive forward. So today is for you if you find that you've been trained to do that swan dive forward and you've noticed maybe over time it hasn't felt as great for your low back. The more and more that you've done it, this hip hinge will help you to alleviate that by engaging a little bit more on the way down. Or maybe you've never done a yoga practice and you're wondering what's the best way to get up and down. Well, I'll tell you what, this is a very sustainable way to do it. So without any further introduction, you can make sure you have 2 blocks handy if they're available at home. Don't worry about it too much if you don't have your blocks. We'll use them at one point in the flow, but again, if you don't have them, no big deal. So come down onto your back. First, walk your feet in. They don't have to be super close or anything like that, but we just want to be connected into the floor. You want to be able to bring your palms onto the tops of the leg bones here, the tops of the thighs, pressing into your palms, having a straightening effect into the elbows. They might not get totally straight depending on how long your arms might be, but just allow this to already feel a little bit of uncorking in the hip. So here's the thing about that hip hinge too, is many of us work in a seated position throughout the day. And so all of these tissues and the muscles, the hip flexors at the front of the pelvis end up in this shortened position and they actually get underactive. So we're sitting into it, it's shortened, but we're not engaging it. So right off the bat, let's start to just get a little bit of movement and heat in here. I'm taking my pointer and middle finger, plugging them into the place where the leg bones meet the hip socket. And then 1 foot at a time, you're gonna start with the right leg, lift the right foot off of the ground and bring your right knee over top of the right hip and bring your right foot down, and then lift your left knee and bring your left knee over top of the left hip. So we're just doing a little marching here, a little bit of hip flexion. And again, just because the muscles at the front of the hips are tight doesn't mean that they are strong or activated. So right now we're just getting a little bit of awakening into them if they've gotten a little bit sleepy. You might notice like there could be a little bit of a popping sensation or one hip is noisy, but the other one isn't. I'll say try to pull down a little bit deeper into the core. See if a little more stability doesn't help you to manage that. We'll go one more time with the right foot, one more time with the left foot, both feet down onto the ground. Press into both of your feet. We're going to do a little spinal wave here. So now we're going to extend the hips, get them out of that flex position. Pressing into the feet, you'll lift your tailbone, almost curling it up, pointing it at your legs here, and trying to curl it almost towards your chin, bringing the middle spine off. The shoulders will stay on the ground. The back of the skull is planted, keeping the neck long, and then lowering down, use an exhale, come from your shoulders through your middle back, and then uncurling your tailbone, lowering that all the way down onto the ground. And once you land with the back of the hips, shoulders, and the back of the skull on the ground, again, press into the feet, curl your tailbone, lower back, middle back, and then until you're just on the shoulders and the back of the skull, extending the hips for a moment. Squeeze your glutes, not about how high up you go. I just want your glutes fired up and your low back feeling long. Come on down. This time, we're gonna press into the feet. We're gonna bring it up one at a time, one vertebrae at a time, low back, mid back, upper back, and then stay here. So again, it's not about how high up you are. You just wanna be in this good ramp position. If you're wondering what's ramp pose, what's low bridge, go check out the ramp pose, low bridge class. So you can even bring your hands onto your glutes, especially right where your legs are plugging into the bottom of the glutes. Give them a little squeeze, a little pat and slap there. You wanna make sure the lower fibers of the glutes are working just as much as those upper fibers. And the low back's not doing all the lifting, right? We're not protruding the ribs, but we're holding them in and pointing our tailbone again towards our heels, borderline scooping it towards our chin. Take your hands up to the ceiling, spread your fingers. Just take your left hand across your 4 fingers on the right hand and pull them back towards your face. Use just gazing at the right thumb to pull away from the palm. And release the right hand, pull back on the left hand, spread the 4 fingers of the left hand, palm is up, and your thumb comes out to the side. and release that left hand, and then make fists with your hands. So bring your hands in a fist, then draw those knuckles down and forward. So you're just getting a big opening into the forearm. It's a nice way to open it up. Now I know you've been focusing on your forearms and your wrists opening up, but don't forget about your hips here, getting that, again, hip extension and activating them using the glutes. And then we can release, rolling the wrists. Let's come down, upper, middle, and lower back, one vertebrae at a time. Really nice there. Take your hands behind your head, and we'll light up our core here to really be able to feel some of these principles of the hips hinging, getting into our hip flexors, some iliopsoas, and some other good stuff. Hands behind the head, interlace your fingers, pull the elbows in, inhale, exhale, draw the belly button into the low back and lift the shoulder blades up and off of the ground. Your skull is still relaxing into your palms. So just hold on this first one. We're just gathering everything together, feeling the sensation of the front body pulling into the back body and lifting your shoulder blades off the ground just a little bit. Just get those shoulder blades up and hold it. Inhale and lower. Exhale and lift. Pull it all in with the exhale. And bring your left knee over top of the left hip again, like we did in that march before, but this time we're definitely adding a little more demand with the shoulders off the ground. Lower your left foot back down and then bring your shoulders down. So inhale now, bring the shoulders down. Stabilizing, exhale and lift. Here's our reset for the core. Right knee comes over top of the right hip. We're getting those hip flexors active and awake. Right foot comes down and then inhale and lower. So this will really light them up. Just gonna do it a few times. Exhale and lift. Everything gathers together, shoulder blades come up, left knee comes over the left hip. Bring your right palm on top of your left thigh and push them together. So the left leg is pushing into the right palm, but your right palm resists it, pushes back, and you should be feeling a big pulling down, the lighting up of that iliopsoas, whole connection. Right hand comes back, left foot comes down, inhale and lower. Exhale and lift, so everything gathers together. Right knee over right hip, left palm on top of right thigh. Push your left palm into your right thigh. Still try to relax that head into the palm here, so we don't want it to be fighting too much in the neck. Resist with that right leg. The right leg would win, really, right? If they had to go against each other, it's probably a little stronger. I don't know, maybe that hip flexor is sleepy. So left hand comes back, right foot comes down, inhale and lower. Let's get one more each side. You can do it. Exhale and lift. So we're bringing a little fire, a little heat into those hip flexors, those sleepy, sleepy hip flexors. Left knee over the left hip, right hand on top of left thigh, push them together, really connect your right shoulder blades lighting up. Hand comes back behind the head, left foot lowers. Inhale, bring the shoulders down. Exhale and lift. Belly draws in. Right knee over right hip, left hand on top of right thigh. Push them into each other. Really feel that like gut-wrenching sensation. And then left hand comes back, right foot comes down, and then inhale and lower. All right, so like everything from your shoulders all the way down into your, where your legs plug into your hip should be feeling pretty awake now. So be ready to work this hip hinge. Come around onto hands and knees. We're coming into our quadruped. And from our quadruped, you're just gonna set yourself up. We're going right into our down dog. But first check in. You don't have the floor anymore to remind you to keep that spine in line, but still see if you can keep the back of the skull in line with the shoulders, in line with the back of the pelvis here, the sacrum. And so you wanna feel the low ribs pulling in, throat's lifting into the back of the neck, your palms are pressing into the ground. You can even use your fingertips and kind of grip tight onto the floor. Press your palms into the floor, feel your shoulder blades hug onto the back ribs, tuck those toes. Now, with the weight equal between the hands and the toes, I want you to hover the knees and you're hovering quadruped, and then hoist your pelvis upwards towards the ceiling. Your knees don't have to get straight and you don't have to bring your heels down towards the ground. Allow as much bend in the ankles and as much bend in the knees and as deep of a hip flexion, a hip hinge, as feels long and comfortable for the back. Again, push into the hands and the feet equally. Spread those fingers, grab the floor at the fingertips. Again, feel like you could dial your left hand out to the left. Look at the right hand. Feel like you could dial your right hand out to the right. So that pinky edge side of the hand, feel like it would go dialing out, but it won't actually move. So you have that good sticky mat under you. Press into the toes. Draw. It's going to be energetic, but draw those leg bones up and into the hip sides. Feel your lower ribs pulling in. Another big breath here. Straighten the elbows. Keep that chest lifted. Feel like you're lifting your forearms away from the floor. And if the chin is lifting a lot, you can draw that chin in towards the sternum. Nice job. And we're gonna walk it back into our first hip hinge. So listen carefully. At some point you might come onto the fingertips, but walk the hands back. Bring your heels onto the ground. When you're ready to lift onto the fingertips, you can do that, but try and get your ribs connected to the top of the thighs. So I'm hinging at my hips, sitting the hips back, making room for this femur bone to come back into the pelvis and into the hip socket. With your hands or your fingertips connected onto the ground, you're in a deep, deep hip flexion. Spine is long by keeping the belly lifted into the low back. And then everybody, bring your hands onto your shins, press into your feet and stand up tall. Trace your palms up your legs, up the thighs, onto those two little bony frontal hip points, and then even push into your toes and lift the ankles, then come on down with the heels. We're gonna do that 3 times here. It's a squat hip hinge practice. The hands are gonna prevent you from shooting the knees forward and from tipping in the pelvis. Instead, we'll really move those hips back. So sit the hips down and back as you slide your hands down the shins, and they might just get to the knees or mid shin, and that's great. If you feel like going lower, you're gonna really round the spine and everything, then just stay there. Or you can come down to the ankle, or maybe just tap the floor at the fingertips again. So again, slide the hands up the shins, past the knees, up the thighs, pause at the 2 little bony frontal hip points at the front of the hips, pushing the toes, lift the heels. Bringing it down. Really nice job. And one more time to press in and rise it up. Again, if you get mid shin, that's great. Just keep that core on, work that hip hinge. One more time here, hinge at the hips. Hands are gonna come down, all the way down. So sit your hips down and back, palms come down, walk it into down dog. Again, just get those hands out until the weight is about equal between the hands and the feet. Grip the floor with the fingertips. And then take a couple of steps to get there, but walk your feet towards the hands and try not to pick up at least the fingertips off of the ground. So keep some part of the hand connected into the ground. Take a few steps, come to that hinge of the hips at the top of the mat. This might even be the first place the blocks are handy. So you could even have them up on the highest height. If you have 2, you could get your palms onto them. If that helps to elongate the spine, helps take the pressure out of the back and helps you keep the belly lifted. You might also have your hands down on the ground, hips sitting back. Everyone's gonna be a little different with that level of opening. Fingertips down on the ground, great as well. One more time here, wherever you are, bring your hands up your shins, trace them up the shins, up the knees, up your thighs, onto the bony frontal hip points. You can keep your heels grounded here. So here we are in our mountain pose. Hips are extended here. Maybe even take your hands to each side of the pelvis. And notice here, with the hip extended, if you sit in a seated position a lot at your job, you might find that your tailbone's kind of poking back and that you're dumping into the low back a little bit. It's called an anterior tip of the pelvis. And here's why, right? So you're in that seated position, all this stuff gets tight. Well, you go to stand up, and even though you're extending your hips, your pelvis is still getting pulled forward. So if you do feel that, a little PSA, you can root that tailbone, pull that core in, feel long and strong there. We'll start off using our thumbs to help us out here. So take your thumbs, plug them into the bony frontal hip points, the 2 hip creases here. And like we did before, but we're just gonna come halfway. We're gonna pull our thumbs back into our hip creases and fold our torso towards our thighs. So you're just connecting them together. And if they don't connect, it's just very close. Belly's pulling up and into the low back, and then push into the toes, extend your hips. Now you're kind of trying to press your glutes through your hips and into your thumbs. Now again, thumbs hooked into those hip creases, draw them back. You're pulling them back in space, physically helping that touch give you a little assist of what hinging at the hips feels like. Again, not tipping and rounding the low back of the pelvis, but keeping that long and lengthened balance to the spine. Press into the feet, stand up tall, extend the hips. Again, we're going for a movement that our body can do millions, billions of times. Pulling those hips back, hip hinge, one of those movements we can do over and over again, but we gotta practice it and do it in a healthy way. This time, after that 3rd time, just gonna have you shift a little bit of weight into your left leg and slide your right leg back. So press your right big toe into the ground, feel that activation there. A little bit of weight into the left leg as you step that right foot forward, unhinge the hips and extend. arms come down by your side. Just roll those shoulders back a few times because chances are your shoulder blades were working pretty hard for you there to get that push back and that engagement. But now bring the thumbs again into each hip crease. And with those thumbs in the hip crease, right where that leg plugs into the pelvis, you're gonna pull it back, folding your torso towards your thighs without rounding your low back, a little bit less sustainable of a movement as this hip hinge, this squat position. You know, press back into your feet, rise up with that long spine, press your glutes forward and into the thumbs. And this is everything, right? Pull those hips back. This is going to pick some money up off the street, going to pick our niece or our nephew up, going to pick the puppy dog up, push your feet into the ground, extend the hips, standing up tall, keeping the spine long. So you're not practicing that rolling of the spine and that, you know, less stable position, right? We want to protect that low back. Pull the hips back. One more time here into that hip hinge. Shift your weight a little into the right leg and just slide your left leg back. Spread your left toes and really push into that left leg. And then weight shifts into that right leg again. Just slide that left leg forward, step it forward, push into the feet, rise on up, arms down by your side. Again, roll your shoulders back, keeping the ribs contained. Let it sing a little bit, and a little bit of opening there. Let's take it just a little bit further. You can have your hands on the blocks, highest height, medium height, lowest height. You decide what feels good here right away. Maybe find out if you know you're rounding at the lowest height, then you could come up a little bit higher. You might still be kind of disengaging the core. So I'll show you that the highest height option there. Really nice. From here, once again, just stand up tall. Once you have your blocks set up, keep practicing a good hip hinge. Inhale, reach the arms forward and up this time. Keep rooting your tailbone, try not to protrude the low ribs. And then bring your thumbs up into the hip creases. Hinge at the hips, bring your ribs towards your thighs. And get about halfway, bring your hands down onto the blocks. So if you don't have those blocks, your fingertips are what you're gonna use. So we're either on the fingertips or on some height of the blocks. And then just bring your thumbs back into your hip creases and rise back up. Really, really nice. We'll do that one more time. Just keep your thumbs where they are, pull them back, fold the torso, hands down onto the blocks. If they're not on the blocks, then they're on the fingertips. Step the right foot back, press into the right leg, rise up into a high lunge. This time, bend the right knee and really root your right glute down into the ground. You can step your right toe forward a little bit if you need to bend that knee more. Really good job here. And so hands are going to come down a little bit in front of your left foot, either onto the blocks or onto the fingertips. Show you that highest height. Load the hands or fingertips, step your right foot to meet your left. Spine is long here, hinging at the hips. Hands come back into those hip creases, press the feet, stand up tall. Let's do this 2 times, and then we'll take it to the other side. So arms down by your side, start off, reach the arms forward and up on an inhale. Keep the ribs contained. Exhale, bring your thumbs into those hip creases. So thumbs up position, pull those hips back, hinge at the hips. And about halfway, keep that belly on. Hands are either gonna come down onto the blocks, various height, or even blocks and fingertips or combo. And then hands come back into thumbs on the hip creases and you stand up tall. Press your glutes through the hips, almost into those thumbs. Resist them back, kind of like the core. And then pull the hips back, hinge at the hips, exhale. Use the exhale to lift the belly into the low back. Hands come down onto the blocks, fingertips, any height. Step your left leg back, extend the left leg, and then inhale, arms reach up. High lunge. Bend the left knee so you can really squeeze your left glute and root that tailbone down into the ground. You can always step your left foot a little bit closer to really get it working for you here. Hands come back down so you're hinging the right hip onto the fingertips or blocks. Load your palms. Keep your hands connected to the ground. Don't let them pick up. Left foot steps forward, pressing the feet, and bring the hands back into those hip creases. Inhale, rise up, press, and extend. Arms come down by your side. So you can either just bring the arms straight down or keep working with the hip hinge, thumb crease. I'll show that one on the first side throw. Inhale, one more thing. Arms reach forward and up. Exhale, hands come down to the floor or the blocks, or you bring those thumbs into the hip creases. Again, you could be on the blocks or the fingertips. But then from here, if you are on the blocks or the fingertips, move the blocks aside or come all the way down onto your palms and really let your butt sit down. So here's why. We work this hip hinge, keeping that core on so we can move in a variety of ways. Step back into plank, strong in that plank. Really good job. Your core is firing up here. Glutes are working. That hip hinge got you here, and you never let the core go. Lift up, pushing into the hands and the toes equally into downward facing dog. Feel free to step those feet forward. If you like your hands on blocks from down dog, already set that up by bringing your hands onto the blocks, and then step right foot, left foot. Try and keep your hands or your fingertips connected to the ground. Hinge at your hips. You can bring your hands up your shins, tracing them up past the knees onto the bony frontal hip points. Heels can stay down, arms by your side. Inhale, arms reach forward and up. So again, thumbs in the hip creases, or exhale, hinge at the hips. Hands come down onto blocks, fingertips, or palms. If they're on the blocks or the fingertips, remove the blocks, sit your butt down even lower, and then step back into plank. So there's hinging at the hips, keeping the core on, stepping back into plank. Hoist the pelvis up, downward facing dog. Weight stays equal between the hands and the feet. Give me one breath here. Again, if the hands were up on the blocks when you folded, bring them back up onto the blocks, and then step your left foot forward, step your right foot forward. Fingertips are fine as well. Bring your palms onto your shins. Again, stand up by sitting your butt down a little bit, and then keeping the spine long, hands trace up the thighs. Once you get to those bony frontal hip points, maybe this time pushing the toes with the heels, and then heels come on down, arms down by your side. Really nice. So that is just a little hip hinge, hip extension move for you. A lot of times in the LYT practice, we take this and adapt it from our deep forward fold, which again, just from our perspective, movement-wise, moving your pelvis in this way has a lot less mileage to it than moving your hips. And if you're squatting, you're deadlifting, you're doing a yoga practice, you're going to pick something up off of the floor, you want that spine loaded, even, lengthened, and ready to go. So whenever you come to these LYT methodology classes, you'll hear these cues. Inhale, arms reach forward and up. The teacher might say fold forward or hinge at the hips. This is what we're talking about. We're skipping the deep forward fold, pretty much exchanging it for just the halfway lift because your palms are already on the ground, or at least the fingertips. And again, just sets you up to move in a variety of ways where your core is on, fired up, and ready to go. So come onto your back and we'll just get a little extension of the hips to close it out. You can take this for longer, but I'm just gonna take it for a few breaths, show you each of these, and you could either come back onto the other side after you've stretched on both sides. But wiggle the feet wide. You're on your back of the skulls on the ground, shoulders, back of the hips. Point your tailbone forward. Drop your knees off to the right. Don't worry about them falling all the way down, but push into your left inner arch and really press your left heel into the foot. That should fire up the left glute. Left hand's on the left glute, right hand comes on top of that left bony frontal hip point. So again, we're taking our hip flexor, the hip hinge, from that hinged crescent position, and we're just expanding it. And just breathe, keep your low back long by rooting your tailbone down to your feet. You're pressing into your left heel again. You're squeezing your left glute. This thing is on. Opening up the front hip muscles by activating back hip muscles. You could also reach your left arm up. That's a nice extension for the side. All just good options. When you're ready, come through center. So the feet are wide, drop them to the left. Press the inner arch of your right foot into the ground, and especially the heel. That should help you point your tailbone to get the low back long, fire up the right glute. We want those muscle fibers working so you can release the muscle fibers in the front of the hip. Left hand in front of the right hip. It's just a nice physical cue again, like we've been using our thumb to do the opposite thing, to take the hip from flexion now, that crescent position, into extension, a little elongation. And again, the right arm can reach up and so stay long in the low back, opening up the hip, using the glute. And you can just bring it back through center, or you could go over to the other side for a few more breaths, whatever you like here. When you're ready, you can lay down for Shavasana or make your way up into a comfortable seated position. And then after that, getting up using your hip hinge that you practiced so well. So again, the idea of these modifications, these resets in practice to help us bring ahimsa, non-harming, into our practice and our bodies. So when we cultivate that in our bodies, we create that in our spirits, and we certainly bring that out with us into the world. And so the light in me honors the light that shines in each of you. Namaskar.